Well, hello and welcome to Education 362.7. This is a recorded slideshow of the slides for the seventh session when we start to talk about management communication and decision making. But the way I'd like to do that is by talking about how managing technology to manage learning can really change the school environment. Throughout this course, we think about school management and organizations, the tasks of the school administrator, the principal in particular, in moving instruction to benefit children in schools. So I'd like to move away from the theory in the course a little to start talking about what happens when you look at an application, a situation, an example where what you're trying to do is achieve significant change in a school. And today, for most administrators, that means learning new ways to manage technology, to choose technologies, to implement them, to use them effectively through the school so that they're tools, not toys, in the education of our children. So tonight what I'd like to do is talk about three things: blended learning, the flipped classroom, and have you do something with that in some planning pages, moving with tradition. So there'll be three big areas we'll talk about tonight. It's really all about managing change in a school and moving toward the example we're going to be taking from now to the end of the quarter of looking how we can manage big change in a school by using technology as an example for that, and also learning some of the new technologies that administrators need to make significant use of. In particular, learning about learning management systems and e-portfolios, which you'll have a chance to do in most people's cases are doing projects on learning management systems as their option. People are pretty much doing option 4A or 4C, or just about everyone's doing an e-portfolio for their final exam. So you'll have a chance to not only learn about it, but actually play with it, do some things with it to see how you might want to use it in a school. Well, that brings us to our first major topic tonight, which is, well, how does this work? If we were to think for just a minute about the process, we'd realize that assessment drives instruction. Now, that's a maxim that we've all heard over and over again and have realized has just become kind of a traditional way of understanding what we do. But let's talk about what those ideas mean for a minute. You'll remember, those of you who had other courses, I've talked about what assessment is. And a traditional definition of assessment is that assessment is the gathering of educationally relevant data for the purpose of making a decision to benefit the child. You see, there's 6 ideas there. It's gathering something, which you gather, so it's got to be many things. It's got to be educationally relevant. It has to do with the school life of the child, not like necessarily everything. It's data. It's based on data, not just opinions or observations are a kind of data, but it's beyond perceptions and opinions. But what purpose is it for? It's always for the purpose of making a decision, and that decision has to benefit the child. Now, data that allows you to make a decision is really critical in the process, but if that's what assessment is, what's instruction? Now, I'd like to move to a different way of thinking about instruction tonight, to think that instruction is really the selection, arrangement, and delivery of instructional assets for the purpose of achieving an outcome to benefit the child. Now, in a lot of ways, it's picking up on some of the same ideas, but I'm really talking about 6 ideas once again. First of all, it's about selecting, it's about arranging what you select, and it's about delivering what you've arranged. So it's a process that isn't just about what you do in the classroom on a daily basis, but it's really about how did you get to deciding that was what we do? How do you arrange those particular things? And what is it we're talking about selecting, arranging, and delivering? Well, instructional assets. So starting to think about what we use for instruction as a series of assets plural, many. But our real task is to select which ones, arrange how we're going to use them, and deliver them in an effective way, always for the purpose of achieving an outcome. That is, we're increasing or decreasing a behavior, we're increasing or decreasing understanding, we're building someone's ability to construct reality, we're connecting people to other things. We may have many kinds of outcomes. Those outcomes could be increasing a skill, what people can do, increasing their knowledge, what they know. It could be about changing their attitude, their mental dispositions toward learning, or the beliefs that fundamentally animate the way they live their lives, or the kinds of habits that allow them to be successful or not in their life, both in school and in the world. But all of that ultimately must benefit the child. So just as assessment is all geared around those benefits to the child, so is instruction. Now, when we talk about those instructional assets, though, there's really 4 kinds we'll be talking about: text, face-to-face learning, digital assets for learning and community-based assets for learning. And so when we bring that together, we see that the decision making that we're doing based on the assessment is really all about how we're going to select, arrange, and deliver assets that the assessment informs us and later evaluates for us, that allows us to achieve an outcome. But what we're mostly interested in tonight are those instructional assets. How do we move text, face-to-face, digital, and community learning together? Well, if I think about that for a second, I talked about four assets. The text learning. Now, the textbook, narratives that we read, nonfiction that we read, informational text. There's a wide variety of text sources available that we continue to think about in learning. And we also have increasingly digital sources of learning. So besides the things that are available in text form, that text may be in the form of digital learning, but digital learning, whether through computers or tablets or phones or any number of devices, allow us to go into a world of really rich media that includes audio and video, that includes games, that includes engaging kinds of things. So while text can be deployed digitally, there's an intersection there, what I'm really looking at is all the new learning opportunities, learning assets that exist in digital form. And of course, face-to-face learning, the processes of classroom instruction, the things that require people to be together that not only allow understanding to take place, allow us to respond immediately to people, make learning a social experience, make these things worthwhile, but really are our traditional form of interaction with students. And then the one we often neglect, which is community-based learning. So where do we learn besides school? One of the questions I could have started with is, where does learning take place? And we'd answer, well, it takes place in many places. It takes place in the community. It takes place in the family, in the surrounding community, the neighborhood, in the extended family, and all the places you go and all the things you do, as well as in school, as well as in the encounter with text, as well as through the whole world that has opened with computers and digital media. What we're really saying is that learning is the creation of meaning in the intersection of all these different assets. So if learning is really, some people say learning is a change in behavior as a result of experience. Then they'll get more specific and say, well, it's an enduring change in behavior as a result of experience. Others will say learning is the construction of meaning as a result of experience, or the generalizable construction of meaning as a result of experience. And others will say learning is really the interconnection of assets. It's the interconnections of persons and assets to sustain learning throughout life. I think learning is all of those things, but I'd like to suggest for a moment that we think of learning behaviorally. It increases or decreases things. That we think of it constructively. We think of it as the construction of meaning that you're able to generalize and take to many places, that's permanent and portable. And we think of it as interconnected, that it's one that allows us to connect with peoples and technologies and worlds beyond just the ones that we simply live in. Now, so what is blended learning? Well, what we do in blended learning is bring those together, realize that it's not just about text learning, I give you a worksheet, you go do it, you come back, or just about digital learning, or about any of those sources. It's really not just about the classroom. It's about how we effectively blend all four kinds of assets together. Now, I realize often when people talk about blended learning, they just talk about face-to-face in some form, technology in some form, and that's really when they talk about blend, they're just looking across the screen of how face-to-face learning and digital learning is one. But really, blended learning, I'd like to think of this as being at least four, probably far more, but certainly involves not just what we do in the classroom and in face-to-face encounters and how we use technology, but how we're using text sources to create meaning and how we're going into the community and using the community as a vehicle for learning. So blended learning is importantly all of those. So what blended learning does is take them, and in both assessment and instruction, we use sources from all four and bring them together. So that means blended learning isn't just about assorting the instructional assets, though it is. It's also about using assessment effectively with face-to-face, digital, text, and community interactions. So if we think about then all the places that learning takes place, what is learning? Well, learning is all of those things. But how do you move your school? As a school leader, your job is to make sure that there really is a balance between those things. And we're looking for how, with significant changes in school, we can move away just from people's preferences, people's experience, people's history, but to really keep up with a generation that is different from us and a world that is different from us. So that brings me to my second major point tonight. I'd like to